Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, please take your seats so that the program can begin. And now with you, Ambassador Albert Ramdin, Assistant Secretary General of the OAS. Ambassador Ramdin, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the House of the Americas and to this historic event. It is an honor for me to welcome the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, Secretary General Jose Miguel Insulza, the Secretary General of COMESA, who will join us very soon, Sindoso Ingwenya, Ministers of Government and government representatives from countries around the world, distinguished ambassadors and members of the Diplomatic Corps, Mr. Stephen Hayes of the Corporate Council of Africa, Ms. Bernadette Paulo of the Africa Society, representatives of international and regional organizations, business leaders from across the Americas and Africa, ladies and gentlemen. Before we go any further, let us take a moment to remember the victims of the attack in Boston and the tragedy last night in Texas. And as we do so, let us also remember those who have suffered loss in many other countries. Please stand to join us in a moment of silence. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a day of opportunity and a tangible expression of interest between two hemispheres. It is a day to build on our common interests to secure the well-being of our countries, our peoples, and our future generations. As a citizen of the Americas, I'm proud of our global heritage and fusion of cultures and peoples. I'm also inspired by the prospects for the future. We live in a world that is changing, where the balance of power constantly evolves. The present environment demands collaboration and partnership if we are to face the future with confidence. It is against this background that the Organization of American States and the government of Trinidad and Tobago developed this idea for a new dimension in continental collaboration. The Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Jose Miguel Insulza, and I both are committed to this concept. Since we took office in 2005, we have worked to strengthen the relations between the Organization of American States and other hemispheric counterparts. The government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Honorable Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar has also demonstrated vision and leadership by working with us on this project. Ladies and gentlemen, the Organization of American States traditionally engages on a political level with a goal towards democracy and peaceful societies. But as the world we live in changes and the challenges to our peoples evolve, we have renewed our efforts and commitment to also connect with the private sector. We understand all too well that peace and democracy often starts with people and populations who are confident in finding opportunities, who are guaranteed access to education, proper health care, and basic services. Successful societies are often underpinned by stable economies. To strengthen our economies, we must continue to work with our private sector. The world is being changed every day by visionaries and entrepreneurs in business and politics, and we must continue to strengthen this partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come to be creative in our engagement. The potential for trade between our two continents is significant. it is time to tap into it on a larger scale. I want to acknowledge the Ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago, His Excellency Neil Parsan, for his vision and working with me and our team to make this forum a reality. What you see here today started with a conversation between Ambassador Parsan, myself, and the idea was executed by our officers and our staffs. It is also a demonstration of the committed partners like the Africa Society and the Corporate Council on Africa and their staffs. As I mentioned earlier, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Jose Miguel Insulza, has worked consistently to strengthen the OAS engagement with other organizations, countries, and groups to broaden the horizon of our connection as an organization with the world. Therefore, it is my honor to invite the Secretary General of the Organization of American States to the podium to share his thoughts on this new engagement. I thank you very much and wish you all the best for the rest of the day. Secretary General.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. We are very proud and happy to have you here again. Ambassador Ramdin, Neil Parsan, our dear friend from the Ambassador from Trinidad and Tobago, I want to congratulate you first by your excellent work in organizing this meeting. Certainly you are the two engines behind this effort, and I'm very proud to recognize that. I want to recognize also the ministers of Trinidad and Tobago who are present with us, other ministers of state, the Director General of the National Planning Commission of Namibia, the ambassadors to the US and to the Organization of American States that are here with us, the representative of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, other representatives of international organizations, ladies and gentlemen, and and above all the representatives and members of the business community who accompany us today. We are very happy to have you here. Welcome all to our House of the Americas for this first Americas Africa Business Forum. Let me begin by saying that we have been pursuing, as Albert Ramdin said, a closer relationship with Africa for quite some time. Over 5 years ago, we began with a highly successful exchange called the Democracy Bridge Forum, held in these premises, and I had a chance also to visit Addis Ababa and address the African Union in 2011 to discuss on challenges and opportunities in the promotion and defense of democracy and human rights in Africa and the Americas. We had the privilege of sending a team of electoral observers to the elections in Angola in 2008, to the presidential election in Togo in 2010, and enabling the exchange of African observers in the elections in Colombia in 2007, in Haiti in 2010 and 11. The OAS has also facilitated the participation of representatives of the African Union at the annual meeting of the Association of Caribbean Organizations in 2008. This is a very timely moment to have this forum. At this moment, the political institutional venues that we trace are giving way to a business and private sector approach that will complement and enhance that exchange to the fullest of its capacity. The other reason why this forum is so timely is to do with the significance of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean in the world stage. We are witnessing one of the biggest historical shifts in economic power taking place before our eyes. The world's economic prospects are increasingly dependent on the fate of the South. The developing world provides already more than 50% of global economic growth and 40% of global investment. Its contribution to global investment, its contribution to global investment growth is more than 70%. The US, European, and Japanese share of global income is projected to fall from 56% today to well under half by 2030. The African continent has been the second fastest growing region in the world for the past decade, just behind emerging Asia. The acceleration in Africa's growth, which averaged 5% per year during the past 10 years reflects significant improvements in the macroeconomic landscape, political stability, and the business environment of the region. The benefits of economic growth have also reached already many of African people. Poverty has been falling. The number of households in extreme poverty fell from 42% in 1990 to 32% in 2006. Around 90 million African households have joined the world's consuming class by 2011, an increase of 31 million households in less than a decade. In the Americas, for the first time in our history, Latin America achieved the past decade a combination of high growth, macroeconomic stability, poverty reduction, and improvement in income distribution. This resulted so far in more than 50 million people escaping poverty. According to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean of the UN, poverty in the region has fallen significantly from 43.9% in 2002 to less than 30% in 2012. For the first time, the number of people in poverty in Latin America equals the size of the middle class. Despite this growing economic influence, developing countries still face their own challenges in their efforts to continue the positive trend behind their rapid economic growth. Trade and investment among our two regions is growing. For example, trade between Brazil and Africa climbed from around 4.2 billion in 2000 to 27.6 billion in 2011. Since 1990, trade between Brazil and Africa has registered an impressive growth rate of 16% per year. Large and smaller firms alike are active in Africa, and Brazilian private investment has a strong presence in the region. I am sure that we will hear more of this in the Odebrecht and Vale presentations here today. The fact that the majority of the Brazilian population, of course, is of Afro-Brazilian origin is something that really has an influence in this. But it's not only that country. I must say that our region is home to 150 million Afro-descendants, which constitute around 30% of the population in the Americas. We know that this diversity is a strength. It is a rich heritage which has helped us shape who we are. A heritage that continues to shape us to this day, through the different languages and cultures that thrive in the Americas. Latin America and the Caribbean on one side, and Africa on the other, have an economic potential which is widely acknowledged in the business community. One of the advantages that we can foresee of this engagement between the two continents may be the positioning of many countries of both our regions as true partners for development rather than just the position we have today, which is certainly promising but not enough. Indeed, our region is familiar with the development challenges faced by many African countries. South-South cooperation is not a vain concept, but a reality in which projects are based on tangible country development experiences. This new partnership underlines the fact that countries from both sides of the Atlantic share development challenges. We have a know-how experience in a range of policy fields: poverty reduction, healthcare, energy, rural development, which we must share. The conditional cash transfers program, for example, which originated in Mexico, Brazil, and other countries, is an example of this kind of collaboration that we must increase. The Africa-South America Summit process symbolizes this rapprochement between the two continents, where countries tend to look towards the north in seeking deeper relationships, and now try to foster meaningful relations with their developing nations, sister developing nations as well. Other countries of the hemisphere are deepening their ties with Africa. The United States has made promoting economic growth, trade and investment, and strengthening democratic institutions one of the main priorities of its new U.S. strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, launched in 2012. The U.S. administration has also pledged to work with Congress to extend the unilateral preferences under the African Growth and Opportunity Act beyond 2015. In Canada, this country is engaged in a process to expand its trade and investment ties in sub-Saharan Africa. The Minister of International Trade's first trade mission in 2013 took place in Nigeria and Ghana. Canada has also recently concluded numerous investment treaties with African nations. And not to be forgotten, of course, here we are, the Caribbean nations are also enhancing their presence in seeking greater trade opportunities with Africa. The fact that this forum is graced with the President of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and some of his ministers, and is organized together jointly by the OAS with this country's government, is a clear demonstration of this fact. We have a newfound sense of optimism in the Americas and in Africa alike. While it is true that both regions face a number of ongoing challenges which we must tackle, our two continents have a chance to achieve transformative growth that is widely shared and inclusive. It is now an opportunity for our leaders in the public and private sector to seize this opportunity. Let's do that together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Sulza. The commitment of this hemispheric body has been reaffirmed, so we can continue to work. It's my pleasure now to call to the podium to address you on behalf of the African continent, His Excellency Sindoso Nguyendia, Secretary General of the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ramdin. Your Excellency Jose Miguel Insulza, the Secretary General of OAS. I also recognize the Ambassador Parson. I understand Ambassador and Ambassador Parson, you are involved in putting this thing together. But I also recognize my good friend Steve Hayes from the Corporate Council for Africa. I understand you also co-sponsored this event. Excellencies, ambassadors here present, and shall I simply say, all protocol observed. Let me issue a disclaimer that I just arrived from New York, where I had an assignment, and then I think my good friends here in Washington decided to rope me in to speak for the continent. And in doing that, I will do it in my capacity, of course, as the Secretary General of COMESA, but also as one of the African Union recognized regional economic communities, because we are simply the building blocks for the African Union. Let me say at the very outset that it's a privilege and honor for me to address this august assembly this morning. And starting with the political dimension, to say when I look at the Organization of American States, which is the oldest international organization, and then I look at our own African Union, which started as the Organization of the African Unity, OAU, African Unity, OAU, I think we have some similarities. Similarities in the sense that for the OAU, now which is the AU, its origins is that immediately after independence in Africa, the African countries decided to establish the OAU in order to first and foremost prosecute the liberation and decolonization of those countries that were not independent. But it also happened at a time when for both the OAS and Africa, we had the Cold War. We had a bipolar world. You had the Soviet Union on one side and the United States on the other. So that was the edge of the Cold War. And therefore, when one looks at the dynamics of what were the issues that were being dealt with then, and also in terms of the coherence, in terms of the vision, you'll find that I think we share some similarities. Now, moving fast forward, we are now in an age of a multipolar world, where we have seen the economic power shifting from the traditional centers of power to the new centers of power, which the Singapore intellectual Marubani has ably described in his book and also the recent book. So let me say here that for us in Africa with the OAU, which replaced the Organization of African Unity in the beginning of the 21st century, we are now in a situation whereby the African Union has its own, institutional, architecture. For example, we have the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, which works very closely with the United Nations Security Council. But what is important here is that gone are the days when, as an African continent, we do not have a common position. And this is why, in saying what I'm saying this morning, I will be arguing that Africa does not have to be looked at in terms of what the World Bank and the IMF, their characterization of Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa, because it is one continent under the African Union. Therefore, even in terms with respect to economic agenda, where I noticed that there's also a tendency for the continent to be divided into Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa or the Maghreb, it is not necessary. And AGOA comes to mind as a typical example, of that. Let me just give you some interesting, statistics in terms of the 54 countries that are members of the African Union, but now includes South Sudan, is that you have a population of slightly over $1 billion and a GDP of approximately $1.8 trillion. Admittedly, still less than Brazil, which is a member of OAS, whose GDP currently stands at approximately $2.2 trillion. Why is this important when I talk about the African Union and OAS? Is because in the African Union we have got the 5 regions within Africa. And then the 6th region is the diaspora. And when you look at the diaspora, America has, the US has got the diaspora. Brazil has the largest population of Africans, so it is in a way part of the 6th region of the diaspora. So there is a lot that brings us together. But taking into account the issues of trade, which I think, and investment, which I think would be of interest to this meeting, all I can say is that the latest figures that I have indicate that the trade between the OAS countries, and I'll only confine myself to the COMESA region for the time being, is approximately $5.5 billion, out of which $5 billion are exports from the OAS countries into the COMESA region, and only $500 million are exports from the COMESA region. The COMESA region, by the way, comprises 19 countries from Libya down to East Africa, and also the countries that are part of the Indian Ocean island. So you can see that in terms of the trade, there is that imbalance. When you look at the top 10 commodities that comprise the 5 billion exports from the OAS countries into the COMESA region, you'll find that they are all agricultural commodities, soy, etc., and Brazil leads in that regard. When you look at our exports, these are a little bit of petroleum, gas, and other products. So when you look at it from that angle, you will find that we do not have that much integration. With regard to investment, or before I go to investment, let me just give you some interesting statistics in terms of the trade with other regions in the world. If you look at China, by 2007, China's trade with the rest of Africa was approximately $35 billion. As I speak, that trade is hovering around the 250 billion mark. So you can tell that there are things that are happening here. And the question to be asked before I deal with investment issues is, what is it that is happening? Apart from the China-Africa Forum that we have, of course, I know that we, as the AU also has the Latin America, Africa, summit. I've attended those summits. You will find that it's as a result of the investments in infrastructure, which are important, but also the investment by Chinese companies in the Africa region. The recent estimates of these is that they now stand at more than 300,000 companies that are active in Africa. Obviously, there are big companies and there are small companies, but the big companies are not that very many. Let me also say something here on these figures, that there is a perception that when it comes to natural resources, that the Chinese investment accounts for the bulk of the investment. That's not correct, even in terms of the production, because I can give some very interesting figures here, that when you look at copper, and I think Zambia, where we're headquartered, is the fifth largest producer in the world of copper. The Chinese company, the Non-Ferrous Metal Corporation, only accounts for 8% of the total production. The rest is by other companies. I'm mentioning this so that we depoliticize the issue of investment, because I tend to see that it comes into the fore. The same applies our investment with India, etc. In the case of COMESA, we are in the process of negotiating a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, or ultimately resulting in a free trade area with the government of India. Obviously, India, like the EU, they have already given duty-free and quota-free market access to the LDCs. And we have got to be careful how we deal with those issues in terms of that integration. The same applies to the negotiations that we have with the European Union, which in this case is limited to Sub-Saharan Africa. North Africa is excluded in terms of the economic partnership agreements, which also have not been very, very friendly to the regional integration arrangement, because we have been broken up into different sub-regions, which does not augur very well for our regional integration arrangement. But coming to the issue of investments between the Organization of American States and Africa, you will find that there isn't much really, except that Brazil leads the pack of countries that are investing in the region. They are investing in the mining sector, they are investing in infrastructure, and also we are seeing in recent times Brazilian companies coming to invest in agriculture, coming to invest in manufacturing in selected countries. But I think that is a good omen that we should encourage. Otherwise, there isn't much investment. Now, why should that be the case? I suspect the reason why that is the case is because the OAS countries historically have always been integrated to the Americas. They are part of the Americas because they are closer to the Americas. But let me say that when it comes to Africa, which has got 7 of the fastest growing economies in the world, Africa is the new frontier. And in any case, the rate of return for investment in Africa on average is 30%. It's higher than in other parts of the world, particularly the OECD countries, where if you get more than 8% of what you invest, then you are extremely, lucky. And this is why you will find that in Africa, if you put your money, in no time you recover, that money. I know there is the issue of governance that is always, when I read The Economist, etc., I notice these days that they are upbeat. I read McKinsey report, I find that they are upbeat. But let me say that when it comes to the issues of governance, I've already indicated that in Africa we have the African Peace and Security Architecture, without which a country, a failed state like Somalia, would not be where it is, with a government and with peace returning, notwithstanding the terrorist attack that happened in Mogadishu, last week. So these are the issues. So the message I have from our region is that our region is ready for that partnership, but let me emphasize that that partnership cannot be based on the partnership that we have had in the past with those who have invested in Africa, because our eyes are wide open, our ears are wide open. We know what we want, and what we want is a win-win, partnership, a partnership that enables us to do value addition, to industrialize, build our infrastructure, and deal with the challenges that we have as an African continent, whereby when you look at the demographics, again, people look at demographics and say, when you have 60% of the population between the age of 15 and 30 or 35, then it's a liability. I would say no, it's an opportunity, and this is why it has got to be looked at in that respect. Because when you look at the demographics of other countries, the OECD countries, you even look at China with the one-child policy, they are already beginning to feel the effects of that demographic pyramid that is upside down. So we have those advantages. I always give this example, according to a World Bank report, that China is moving into the higher end of technologies of production, and therefore that we can also take advantage of the lower end of production. For example, statistics indicate that at the moment about 85 million jobs in the textile and garment sector will have to relocate from China. I know that these are relocating to Cambodia, they are relocating to Vietnam, they are also relocating to some countries in Africa. But the challenges that we face is one of infrastructure, in terms of power, in terms of railroads, etc., because they all contribute to competitiveness of our region. Now, I'm not going to say more. I think I've said what I'm not paid to say, what I was invited rather to say this morning. Suffice to say that in the multipolar world, I don't think we can have a situation where it's either this or that in terms of the development paradigm. The paradigm is such that we must be pragmatic and ensure that whatever development programs or investments that we have, that it benefits our people, as opposed to the way Africa has been integrated into the global economy, whereby it's integrated as a supplier of raw materials without value addition, and hence this explains the structural weaknesses of the African economy. But I can assure you, our leaders are dealing with these issues, and with the emergence of new powers, we are dealing with that. Let me finally say, because people may not be aware of this, and I hope the Japanese ambassador is here, if at all is here, simply to say on the 31st of May, we shall be having the first ever meeting in Japan on the eve of the TICAD 5, which will be Africa Leaders and Chief Executive Forum with the Japanese companies, because Japanese companies are keen to invest in Africa. They've been to my office twice, including Central Japanese Railways. They are keen to invest in railways, they are keen to invest in ports, and they are also keen to be involved in transferring technology, in transferring skills, and so forth. So the point I'm making here is that the continent has radically changed. Because years ago, when I used to talk to Japanese ambassadors, who were my colleagues, to say, why don't your investors invest in Africa? They will tell me, no, you see, if we're investing in Africa, it takes us more than 22 hours to fly to this part of the world. Whereas if we fly to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to Malaysia, it takes us a couple of hours. But I think the dynamics are changing. I leave it to your imagination as to why Africa is being courted by all and sundry, left, right, and center, irrespective of ideology, irrespective of whether they are Christians, animists, or anything. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Ngwenya. I omitted earlier to recognize the representative of the Prime Minister of Namibia, Mr. Tom Alwendo, Director General for National Planning, who is with us on the stage. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard two presentations from an institutional perspective, if I may say so, but excellent to set the stage for the discussions today. Clearly, you have heard there is competition for Africa. Later on today, we hope to share with you the findings of a study done by ECLAC and the OAS in terms of the trade and investment flows as they stand. That will be presented in one of the panels. We hope that the scope of opportunities which exist between the two continents will be further discussed in more concrete terms in the panels which we have this afternoon on energy, agribusiness, and mining. It is my pleasure as we continue the program now to introduce the co-organizer, represented here by the distinguished ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago to the United States of America and to the Organization of American States, Ambassador Neil Parson. Ambassador, you haven't been long here, but long enough to make a mark. I want to thank you very much for working with the OAS on concrete initiatives in furthering our societies and our economies. Ambassador Parson has the floor.
Honorable Prime Minister, Secretaries General, there are two on the stage, Assistant Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Excellent. One of the panels is energy. We need some energy. Today, we make history as we start a new chapter in the relationship between the Americas and Africa. In the whole of the Americas this morning are top representatives of countries and businesses from both continents. Some are here to explore possibilities, others are here to expand networks, but all of us are here because we are aware of the opportunity and the untapped potential which exists between our two continents. The bonds between the Americas and Africa are both historic and, might I add, very sacred, especially to the Caribbean. Our shared history has influenced our identity and in some ways shaped our perspectives. Today, however, we are actively seeking to take our relationship forward by redefining, restructuring, reviewing our relationships. Both of our continents have changed significantly over the past decade. Africa can no longer be defined by old perceptions. While global economic volatility has changed the operating environment within the Americas, it is this reality which compels us to think strategically about where we are, about what options we have for the future. The trade lines are still being mapped out, and there is potential which can and must be realized. The idea, therefore, to host the first Americas Africa Business Forum at the OAS was born in this context. This forum is the result of several discussions that I had with the Assistant Secretary General last year as Trinidad and Tobago was in the process of celebrating its 50th anniversary of independence. Ambassador Albert Ramdin and I felt that this forum would be the perfect gift to both regions, as it would serve to bring the Americas and Africa closer together by beginning the dialogue on the areas for mutual cooperation and investment. The Embassy of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in Washington, D.C., and the Office of the Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States work together on the belief that if we are serious about improving the quality of lives for the peoples of our countries and the region and the Americas as a whole, then we would need it to be a concrete initiative to tap into that potential, an initiative that could bring together both the private sectors and the governments with a view to doing business. I wish to sincerely thank the very hard-working staff of the Office of the Assistant Secretary General of the OAS and the Office of the Trinidad and Tobago Embassy, Washington, D.C., in making today's event a reality. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I also wish to say a resounding thank you to the Corporate Council on Africa and the African Society of the National Summit on Africa. Bernadette and Stephen, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will hear from a range of business executives and government officials from both continents. First, I would wish to make a logistical change. On the program, we were due to hear from Namibia. I wish to elevate the Honorable Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago by one notch in the program to facilitate her interaction first. So it will actually be my pleasure to introduce her to you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago is the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar. The Prime Minister's remarkable life and achievements have made history time and time again. She was the first woman to serve as Attorney General, Acting Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, and in May 2010, she became the first female Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. She is deeply committed to regional integration and improving trade and investment, not only within CARICOM, but with the Americas and Africa in general, and might add globally. The Prime Minister has also been an active proponent of advancing the agenda on gender equity and equality, women's empowerment, promoting women's political participation, advocating for greater inclusion of women and girls at all levels of decision-making, and for the elimination of violence against women. She has consistently emphasized the need for women to be viewed as equal partners with men in private and public spheres of life in order to contribute to sustainable development. Prime Minister, that's why you saw so many women in my office yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it is with humility and honor I welcome on stage to address the Americas Africa Business Forum the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar.
Thank you very much. His Excellency Ambassador Parison, I thank you very much for that introduction. And before I have my conversation with you, I would like to share what I see as a very favorite introduction that I've had in my public life. I was Minister of Education of my country, and as part of our duty, we get invited to school graduations. Yes. And so I was invited to a school graduation, high school graduation, and the teachers at the school, they decided that they would not have an adult introduce me. They would have one of the students introduce me. So they got a Form 1 student who would have been about 11 years old in his first form in high school. And he traipses up and he comes to the podium and to the microphone, 11-year-old boy, and he says, "My job here is very simple. All I have to do is introduce Kamla. But," he says, "I am not going to make any long, boring speech. However, I will now introduce you to someone who will, Kamla Misasa." Excellencies, Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, distinguished representatives here on the platform, in the audience, from Trinidad and Tobago, a delegation representing the private sector, public sector, my Minister of Finance, Mr. Larry Hawaii, our Minister of Energy, Mr. Kevin Ramnarine, a permanent secretary from that ministry, and indeed from several state companies or chairmen who are here, distinguished excellencies from the Americas and from Africa. I'm very happy to join you, and I trust I will not be making any long, boring speech in our conversation this morning, but really to say that this first ever America's Africa Business Forum, co-hosted by the OAS and indeed by Trinidad and Tobago, really presents us with a very important and ideal opportunity to exchange views and, of course, to share so much that we have in common. This initiative, I strongly believe, has the potential to open doors of opportunity, not just for business and government, but of course for people from both continents, from both hemispheres. And so when we remember that Africa and the Americas collectively have a population of about 2 billion people, we are talking about 29% of humanity, we can see the potential for both areas, both regions. And so the forum has the potential to produce tangible results as we strive together to improve the quality of life for all our citizens. Indeed, this gathering realizes the value of collaboration and seeking out new partnerships in the face of challenging times around the world. And you know, just as I arrived here, my Minister of Finance said he was so happy that he went to the breakfast meeting this morning, apart from getting a very good breakfast. Thank you, Ambassador. He said he met a company who were into the food production area, and they were very interested in a project in Trinidad and Tobago in which we can use natural gas and convert it into a high-protein animal feed. As we all strive for food security now, I mean, that's a very important project, and Minister, I wish you would pursue it with the representatives who are here today. And so the networking is going to be very important for projects that we can do together, we can partner in. So that food security, we know, is so important and so vital. I'll return to that in a moment when I talk about the potential of Africa in terms of collaboration in that regard. And so in this forum, with the networking here, we can seek out new partnerships in the face of very challenging times around the world. And so, for this reason, one of the pillars of my government's foreign policy agenda is the fostering of South-South cooperation. And if I may say, with no disrespect to those from the North, I have always found it so strange, but if I want to fly to the South, if I want to go to Africa, or anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere, I first have to fly to the North. The normal lines aren't the same. Africa will tell you if you have to come south, you have to fly to the north, go up to Europe, and then come back down south. So in simple ways, there's so much, just physically think of that, of the time that you would save in terms of even transport lines, transportation links, that my agenda, yours, I'm saying, we need to concentrate now on South-South cooperation. As I look across this hall today, the whole of the Americas, I recognize we are joined by government officials, by leaders in business, by industry heads from both continents. There are people here today who have already begun to explore the potential which is available and who have successfully ventured out and tapped into new opportunities in non-traditional markets. In this room, I recognize leaders who work with the knowledge that all obstacles must be overcome and can be overcome once we persist. Indeed, this forum is founded on the value of cooperation and the belief that by working together, we can strengthen our economies, we can generate employment, we can increase productivity, and in so doing, we can provide more opportunities for traditionally underrepresented groups like our women and our children. Let's take a look at the African continent. The Americas and Africa are geographically very distant, but we have always had deep connection. Indeed, in the Caribbean, in my own country, a significant part of our identity is tied to Africa. It is reflected in the ethnic fusion of our people, in our music, our food, and indeed in one of our greatest celebrations, our carnival each year. Africa is alive in the Caribbean, and it is the same for many parts of the Americas. Indeed, His Excellency spoke earlier about the African diaspora. Did you say it was 150 million persons in the African diaspora in the Americas? Am I correct, sir? Yes, thank you. So there is a huge diaspora, and much of that is found in the Americas and indeed in our own region in the Caribbean. The Africa today, however, cannot be defined by the old images. According to the World Bank latest Africa Pulse, economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa is likely to reach more than 5% on average in 2013 to 15, ensuring that the region remains amongst the fastest growing in the world. Africa now boasts of some of the fastest growing economies in the world, where additional natural resources have also been found. Indeed, some of the most significant discoveries of natural gas in recent times in Tanzania and in Mozambique. These discoveries, if properly utilized, have the potential to socially, politically, and economically transform East Africa and surrounding countries. And today, I met our colleague from Equatorial Guinea, and we've been speaking also of the work in the energy sector. One of the challenges, in my respectful view, that Africa must meet in the coming decades is that of electrification. According to Scientific America, 79% of the people in the third world have no access to electricity. The total number of individuals in the world living without electricity is put at about 1.5 billion, or a quarter of humanity. This, I am advised, is concentrated mostly in Africa and Southern Asia. Lack of access to electricity, we can well understand, significantly compromises manufacturing, the services sector, healthcare delivery, education, and indeed, quality of life for any individual. The natural gas endowment of Trinidad and Tobago was first used to generate power, and later we used it to build our industrial platform. In like manner, natural gas must first be used, in my respectful view, to develop the people of Africa, to raise their standard of living. Today, I say Trinidad and Tobago stands ready to assist Africa is natural gas-based development. And indeed, as we come to the petroleum sector, we have 100 years of experience, one of the oldest oil petroleum industries, and thereafter into natural gas right in Trinidad and Tobago. Indeed, since 2007, there have been 24 delegations from Africa which have visited my country, Trinidad and Tobago. These delegations have come to Trinidad and Tobago seeking to forge partnerships with our country in energy-related matters and to better understand how we have developed what we call the Trinidad and Tobago model of natural gas-based development. Indeed, we all recognize that the world has changed in recent history. In very specific and significant ways, it has been to Africa's benefit. The perceptions of this continent will continue to fade, validating the belief that there will always be a path to recovery, growth, and opportunity. Just a few weeks ago, I understand, the African Union held a meeting where the general consensus was that Africa has the potential not only to feed itself, but the rest of the world. And I think this is a worthy goal and potential as we give Africa a round of applause in the area of food security. I repeat, 9 out of 19 countries in Africa are likely to cut poverty in half by 2015. And Africa has the potential not only to feed itself, but the rest of the world. Let's turn to the Americas. Countries in the Americas also have made progress in the last few years as well. We have weathered the storms, and this year, the IADB is projecting economic growth of 3.6% for Latin America and the Caribbean. There are also indications that the middle class is gradually beginning to grow, and we are finally beginning to make a dent in poverty levels. Yet there are very serious challenges ahead and sharp checks to these gains. We still have some of the most glaring examples of income inequality in the world. The gap between rich and poor is still too wide in our region. Education is still not guaranteed in all of our nations. Food import bills are large, and too many women and children remain very vulnerable. If we hope to keep our countries on a sound footing, we must be proactive. We must inspire our people to pursue a critical shift in thinking, one which understands the reality and uncertainty around us. We must assess options and make the most of the opportunities that can be found by traveling along unbeaten pathways. Trinidad and Tobago is the 6th largest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world and the largest exporter of ammonia and methanol from a single site. We have not been exempt, despite this, from the global challenges. When market volatility confronted us a few years ago, we were compelled to change our export lines. When one market started to dwindle, we had no choice but to quickly adjust, adapt, and find new partners. We successfully strengthened our partnerships with countries in Latin America, in Asia, Europe, and others. Today, 81% of Trinidad and Tobago's LNG exports head to markets which are different to what obtained a few years ago. Indeed, 35% of our LNG exports in 2012 headed to South America, specifically Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Trinidad and Tobago also exports LNG to the Dominican Republic. The other 65% of our LNG goes to the US, Europe, and Asia. From our LNG facilities in Point Fortin, we exported LNG to 19 countries around the world. Today I repeat a phrase often heard: when opportunity no longer knocks, consider building a new door. And this is why I think so many of us are here in Washington today in this first ever America's Africa Forum. We recognize that the time has come to seek out new opportunities, find new partnerships, and in so doing, strengthen our resolve to collaborate. The world before us is changing. The future is unpredictable. The decade ahead for the Americas and Africa will hold many challenges, but numerous opportunities. We must be prepared to confront both. We owe to the over 300 million youth graduating from schools and other institutions of learning over the next decade the creation of an environment where they can achieve their greatest potential in an unfailing bid to build their society, their country, their region, and indeed our entire world. Some reports suggest that in less than 20 years, the world population will grow by 25% to about 9 billion people. Much of the growth is expected to take place in developing countries. It will mean that the global supply and demand patterns are likely to change, causing a shift in sources of power, in sources of energy, and in sources of food. It is therefore up to us to act now to stimulate new paths to prosperity for our children and the generations to come. We must ensure that our education systems are engineered to equip them with the skills they will need to accommodate the advances in technology and the changing demands for goods and services. In this regard, I would say that in Trinidad and Tobago, we made a tremendous thrust in the education sector to ensure that our children are equipped with the technology skills. And so we had promised to the population that we will give to each child entering the high school a laptop computer. That was 3 years ago. So today, the first 3 forms of a high school, every single child has a laptop computer. In 5 years, everyone in the secondary school will have a laptop computer given by the government. And I so I say we cannot continue to rely on the advances of others to sustain us. For decades ahead, we must also stimulate and encourage creative thinking and problem solving, not just in our schools, but also in our workplaces, our government agencies, and indeed in the private sector. We must move away from cynicism. It is easy to find all the problems, always easy to name all the problems and go into the blame game. What requires more skill is working together to find options and solutions. And so Africa and Americas working together, I say, that is the potential that we have today. The Americas and Africa have a very proud heritage in defying the odds. From George Washington to Simon Bolivar to Nelson Mandela, we are a people of resolve and vision. Let us tap into that heritage once again. Let us tap into the spirit of collaboration. We were recently saddened by the passing of the famous Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe. His book, Things Fall Apart, is very popular in my country and indeed in the Caribbean region. I want to quote a few lines from that book. A man who calls his kinsmen to a feast does not do so to save them from starving. They all have food in their own homes. When we gather together in the moonlit village ground, it is not because of the moon. Every man can see it in his own compound. We come together because it is good for kinsmen to do so. End of quote. The world, ladies and gentlemen, indeed, as has been said, is a global village. It is a village that is growing smaller and smaller because of the advances in technology, so that what is happening here right now can be picked up anywhere in the world within a few seconds. I believe we must also safeguard our future by working now to diversify our economies. We must also update our regulatory frameworks and financial systems to protect our economies, to promote transparency in all our transactions. In this regard, my country is presently a candidate for full membership in the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, and we are on course to eventually become a full member of this body. As we do this, I say we must also look and be aware of developments in the world around us. What happens in my country will affect yours, and what happens in yours will affect mine. We have seen that only very recently with the global financial crisis. And so we must renew our commitment to work together, to strengthen our democracies, to support our communities, to promote peaceful societies, and live harmoniously in this global village. As I close, I say, in the world of politics, of interstate and intrastate relations, there is an acute understanding that nothing is guaranteed. Nothing can be taken for granted. With this knowledge, and indeed, if we remember the Titanic, we will know that nothing from since then to now, with a global financial crisis, nothing can be taken for granted, and nothing is guaranteed. And so with this knowledge, we must take advantage of the challenge. We must take the challenge of making the most of the opportunities we encounter. We can no longer be content to rely on traditional assumptions of protection or privilege. We recognize the competing interests and limited windows of opportunity in the world around us. With this in mind, we have been working towards greater South-South cooperation. As we celebrate in my country 50 years of independence, we have resolved to pursue new partnerships, new markets, and new opportunities. Along these lines, my government, through our National Energy Corporation, is working on a new Africa initiative, which includes providing assistance to newly emerging energy-producing countries in Africa, seeking to work with and share best practices in the areas in which we have excelled, including power generation and commercialization and monetization of natural gas. Within our own region, we have recently signed memoranda of cooperation on energy-related matters with Panama, Guyana, and Grenada, and we are in the process of updating an MOU with Brazil. At the same time, Trinidad and Tobago's private sector is also looking to the African and Latin America for trade, technical, and economic cooperation. Indeed, some private sector partners within the Caribbean already actively engaged with countries on the African continent, investing and working in mutually beneficial partnerships. At the same time, our embassies, missions, and our ambassadors have been engaged actively in a path of building bridges through cultural diplomacy and better understanding from our terms of engagement. May I recognize with us two of our ambassadors, my country's ambassadors to Africa, to the continent, Mr. Excellency Patrick Edwards and Excellency Obika. Thank you very much. And so, friends, it is against this background that Trinidad and Tobago has worked with the OAS and the Office of the Assistant Secretary General to facilitate this forum, and with SG of the OAS. We are here because Trinidad and Tobago is prepared to do business. Indeed, I repeat what I've said before, Trinidad and Tobago is open for business, and you're all welcome. Indeed, in June of this year, we host a trade and investment convention, and there's a week of trade and investment opportunities and sharing of ideas and thoughts. And I would ask you to keep your eyes out on our websites, and our ambassadors will work, network to invite you to come to our country in that week in June. Can you remind me of the dates, please? June 12th to 15th. Port of Spain is the destination, the target. You're all invited to attend. Joining me, as I said today at this conference, Minister of Finance and the Minister of Energy. The Chairman, Minister of Finance, please. Can we recognize our Minister of Finance, Mr. Larry Hawaii? My Minister of Energy, Mr. Kevin Ramnarine. The Chairman and President of the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Khalid Hassanali and Mr. Lindsay Gillette. Petrotrin is our lead petroleum company. The Chairman and President of the National Gas Company, Mr. Chedi Singh, Mr. Indar. The Chairman and President of our National Energy Corporation. Well, I think they're here somewhere. NEC? Yes, they are a subsidiary company. And executives from ETEC, are you here? And executives from Invest TT. So all these, yes, thank you very much. There are others who are here, but these are the ones who will work with you in networking. Invest TT, we've created a single window for those willing to do business in Trinidad and Tobago. We can go through all of those. And we have some private sector too. I see Mr. Thackeray is here. Please stand for our energy sector, private sector. Trinis who are here, welcome and thank you very much for joining us. We believe then that working together, the Americas and Africa, we can provide new opportunities for our people. In spite of our differences in distance, I say there is unity of purpose. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who visited my country some time ago, he described us as a rainbow country. Rainbows can signify many things, and that is there can be unity in diversity. Today I believe, although we are diverse in some respects, our two regions can be unified in common goals and purpose to fight poverty, to end equality, to provide opportunity, and indeed to improve the quality of life of our citizens. We can draw inspiration from the words of Nigerian poet Ben Okri, who writes in one of his poems, and I quote, "Only free people can make a free world. In fact, the world, only free people can make a free world. Infect the world with your light. Help fulfill the golden prophecies. Press forward the human genius. Our future is greater than our past." It is my hope that this first ever Americas Africa Business Forum will be a step in this direction. Our future is brighter than our past. Let me thank Ambassador Parson, Deputy SG, and all the others here at the OAS and at the embassy in Washington, Mr. Parson Embassy, for the hard work in putting this together. I want to leave you with the words enshrined in the coat of arms of my country, our watchwords which I find especially inspiring today as we move forward. And they are, together we aspire, together we achieve. This I humbly submit is not only applicable to our country, but to our two continents, Africa and the Americas. May God continue to bless each and every one of you and your families. May God continue to bless the nations from which you all come. And indeed, may God continue to bless the great nation that is my country, Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to the ministers from Trinidad and Tobago, there are several other ministers in the audience. Can you please stand and be recognized, please, ministers? Thank you. The Honorable Minister of Energy of Ghana, Honorable Minister of Finance of Ghana, and several others will be here during the course of the day. I also wish to thank our main sponsors. Sponsors, can you please stand and be recognized? Thank you very much. The CIG Group, NGC, Mr. Robert Shoemaker and his group of companies, SGP Energy Fund, Sanderson Farms, War Water. It's delicious. Try it on your table. I had some. Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has other pressing engagements and she must depart at this time. Can you please stand for the departure of the Honorable Prime Minister? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of Namibia has worked to develop and encourage partnerships in its agriculture, mining, and energy industries. Its manufacturing sector is also being strengthened, and new investment options are on the horizon. We will now hear from the Honorable Hage Geingob, Prime Minister of Namibia, via video. We will also receive remarks immediately following the presentation by Mr. Tom Alwindu, Director General of the National Planning Commission of Namibia. Thank you.
Good morning, Your Excellencies. I would like to bring you greetings from Namibia, in particular, and Africa, at this first America-African Economic Forum. This is a very, very important beginning, and this beginning must be repeated so that we can establish synergies between Africa and America. I'm bringing you greetings from Africa, New Africa as I call it, Africa on the march, where we have gotten our governance fundamentals right, our macroeconomic fundamentals right, and are tackling now socio-economic fundamentals. We have macroeconomic fundamentals. Our economies are managed that we are getting growth rate of 5% in all of sub-Saharan Africa, and also in Namibia, 4%. Governance-wise, Africans don't anymore believe in one-party state, military coups, but we believe in democratic change of government. Therefore, Africa is now on a march, and what we have to do now is to establish systems, processes, and institutions to buttress that democracy. Of course, we are facing social deficits that we inherited from apartheid. That's why we prefer fora like this, where we can tell the world, the investors, the business people who are here, that Africa is ready to do business with you. We have created an investor-friendly environment. We therefore invite you to come to Namibia, to come to Africa, where your investment is safe. And you also get a better return on your investment if you invest in Africa. We maintain peace, unity, and also, as I said, conducive, investor-friendly environment in Namibia and also in the rest of Africa. You may think that Namibia is too small when you look at the population, but I'm talking about SADC region of 300 million people, and we want to use Namibia as a gateway to that region. So once more, I would have loved to be with you, but due to other pressing matters at home, I have to rush back. But my colleagues will remain and participate. So I wish you a success in your deliberations. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to convey warm greetings to all of you from our Prime Minister, Dr. Hage Geingob, who unfortunately could not be with us this morning because of some circumstances beyond his control. But I'm indeed honored to say a few words on his behalf this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no denying the fact that the world we live in today is changing. Not only is the world changing today, but it's changing at a much faster rate. We now live in a world where the borders we knew before are no longer the same borders. We have also witnessed cases where an event happening far away from us has got far implication on all of us. And some of those implications could be negative, and some are negative. The old alliances between the nations of the world are no longer the same. New alliances are being formed all the time, just like we are doing this morning. The recent world economic meltdown is a clear testimony of how the world has changed. Because of what started off as one event in another country have affected all of us. And we are still struggling to recover from that happening. For example, we are witnessing the euro area, for example, which is moving from one crisis to another crisis and potentially distracting them from working on what is sustainable for their economic recovery. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the world we are living and we have to be content with today. Over the last decade, Africa has achieved a number of important milestones in its economic development process. We are now starting to talk about a new Africa. An Africa that not too long ago was referred to by some people as a hopeless continent, to an Africa that is ready to reclaim its rightful position among the other continents. Africa's governance structure has improved significantly over the years. We now have more democratically elected governments on the continent than we have had, say, 20 years ago. In most of our countries, the rules of the law is the norm rather than the exception. Today, African ourselves are the ones who say no to those who want to take political powers by force, simply because it's not in the best interest of Africa. Over the last decade, for example, sub-Saharan African economies on average has grown by over 6%, and a number of African countries graduated from being heavily indebted economies to middle-income economies. This did not happen by accident. It only happened because of the reform measures we have been putting in place over a long time period. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not in any way here suggesting that Africa as a continent has managed to resolve all our challenges. We still have pockets of instability on the continent. We still have too many young people on our continent who cannot find employment. We still don't have the necessary technologies to sustainably exploit the continent's natural resources in the best interest of the Africans. It is therefore in meeting these challenges that Africa and the Americas need to forge more effective partnerships that are underlined by a mutual desire to provide better living conditions from our people. Partnership that is mutually beneficial to all of us. It is my view that we still need to do a lot in order to give meaning, for example, to the South-South cooperation we have been talking about over the last decade. Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America share common history. Most of the Latin American countries, for example, have also been colonized by other countries, just as most of African countries have been. A number of Latin American countries have assisted African countries to regain their political independence. However, that historical relationship is yet to be transformed into a more meaningful economic relationship. Trade between Africa and the Americas is still relatively slow and is limited to a trading in commodities and a few shipping lines. The potential is therefore certainly there to increase the economic relationship between the two regions. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude my remarks, allow me to say a few words about my country, Namibia. We Namibians gained our independence in 1990, and since then, we have been making steady progress in our economic development endeavors. The country is now known for its peace and stability and a well-managed economy. Over the last 15 years, for example, our economy grew by 5.7 on average, and now our per capita income is at $5,500, putting Namibia in the upper middle income category. But I must add that here, although our per capita seems to be that high, we still have a high per capita, we still have a high income redistribution which we need to work on. The Namibian economy, our main export is dominated by mineral commodities such as diamond, uranium, fish, and meat products. And we are making every effort to leverage on our commodities to strengthen our manufacturing capability. For the medium and long term, our current development priorities is to improve our competitiveness by investing in our infrastructures, such as ports, rail, energy generation, and the usage of IT. We are therefore looking for investors to conclude partnership in these areas. Let me then conclude, ladies and gentlemen, by wishing this forum a success, where the end product is a strengthened economic development between the Americas and Africa. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to bring this particular session to a close. I wish to thank the Honorable Prime Ministers of both Trinidad and Tobago and Namibia for having taken the time off to come and address this forum this morning. We will do a very quick turnover of the stage, and we'll be welcoming the next panel, Outlook for the Americas and Africa in the Global Economy, a high-level policy debate. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a great opportunity to network and to talk to each other, but the next panel will start, so please take your seats and we can then continue with the panel about a decade about the outlook for the Americas and Africa.
We're waiting for the minister.
Thank you very much. And everybody who is outside,
make sure that
please, you're invited inside.
Probably. That one, we'll just pass it on.
No, they're already.
Oh, okay.
You're on.
All right. So I should, okay. Tim? Hi, how are you, Mr. Minister? Mr. Minister. Tim, why don't you trade with, since you're going to be leaving early, why don't you get the last seat? Since you're going to be leaving early, why don't you take that last seat?
Okay. Frank. Take a seat.
We're ready to go?
Thank you.
Okay, could I have your attention, please, and we will begin the program. Yes. Sound okay? Okay. Good morning. My name is Stephen Hayes. I'm president of the Corporate Council on Africa. And it is my role as requested by the OAS to moderate the panel. The panel today is titled A High Policy Debate, but the reality is that we will be talking about what are the conditions for investment from various perspectives. With that, we have the Minister of Energy for Ghana, Emmanuel Armah Kofi-Boah. We also have the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Africa, the United States Department of State, Cynthia Kwete. Mr. Tim Turner, the Vice President of the African Development Bank, will be speaking from an investment point of view. Frank Nweke is the head of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, our partner in Nigeria, and certainly the most powerful business group in the most populous country of Africa. And Benicio Fonseca, who is the director for Latin America of one of the largest conglomerates in the world, Odebrecht, from Brazil. The format will be, I will ask each to speak for 3 to 5 minutes from their seat to say what their perspective is on African investment. And then to the extent that we have time, we'll ask questions with that. So let me just start out by just saying very quickly, the Corporate Council on Africa, for those of you who don't know, is an organization of corporations. The members represent about 85% of all U.S. investment in Africa. And even though we're talking about South-South exchange, the United States and Canada is still part of the Organization of American States, so we're also still interested in engaging the northern part of the Western Hemisphere as well into Africa. So with that, Minister Boah, your country is one of the brightest stars in Africa, really, in investment. A great deal is happening. You suddenly have an influx of energy money. What is that going to do to the investment climate? What's the investment climate in general like, and how do you anticipate controlling that?
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. I think that in Ghana, over the last 2 decades, it's very, very clear that what has really helped our economy grow is exactly what has been talked about this morning. Strong institutions, making sure the rule of law works, making sure there's a real transparent, accountable governance across all spectrum of the economy, and then making sure that we continuously empower people, making sure we create the institutions and lay the foundations that will make sure that unemployment is reduced, that we are getting our people out of poverty, and that investors who are coming there also have some certainty that there's clearly a good return on investment. And I think that is what is really brewing across the sub-region, especially in West Africa. If you look at what is happening in West Africa, if you look at the opportunities, discoveries of oil are called West Africa the new Gulf of Mexico, because almost all the countries across the sub-region have discovered oil and gas. But the steps we take to make sure that we have strengthened institutions like what we began in Ghana. And I have to take the opportunity to thank Trinidad and Tobago when we discovered oil in 2007, the support we got in terms of helping us to build very strong institutions that will last. And I'm very proud that as I speak, we just laid a signal from day one when we discovered oil that, one, how do we ensure that revenue that we are getting from oil is guaranteed to benefit the ordinary people of Ghana? What are we doing to protect the environment? What are we doing to ensure that the people of our country participate actively in the industry, that they are not on the sidelines? And those institutions that we began to build are really bearing fruit. And I think those are the signs we are seeing across the sub-region.
Thank you. Secretary Akwete, certainly the United States is concerned, I think, on developing greater economic investment, even though the United States, I think, is still the second or third largest investor in Africa. Its market share certainly is shrinking, which is inevitable when you have more investors. But there's also the concerns about how does the private sector and the public sector work together. What do you think is required in that regard for greater U.S. private sector investment in Africa?
Thank you very much. It's also quite an honor for me to be here. I really want to applaud the organizers of this forum, that it's very timely, and it's something we want to, within the United States government, to encourage and to work with you. Certainly, many of the things that the minister said are important for attracting foreign investment. I think number one, it's the investment climate in the country. What we often tell African governments is that you're competing in a global marketplace. So for investors to come, they certainly need to know that there's sanctity of contracts, there's an independent judiciary, that rule of law is respected, and that regulatory reform is there to encourage that investment. On the policy side, we are really working with governments to help them improve their investment climates. And so also to encourage much more regional integration. As the President of Namibia said earlier, one of the concerns is the small market size in Africa. So we think if countries work together, that will help expand their market and expand market opportunities. One of the other challenges for development or for attracting private sector investment, which is also creates opportunities, is the poor infrastructure development in Africa. Only about 30% of roads are paved, ports are congested, and all of this adds to the expense of doing business. The transportation costs are very high. So as a result also, that creates opportunities for private companies to come in. From a policy point of view, we're also looking at working with our sister agencies such as Exim Bank, OPIC, to look at ways to provide financing. What's very critical for us and what's very important is the understanding that there are not enough public dollars to finance development. And so the private sector has to play a greater role, and we're looking at ways to try to facilitate that. So I think in a nutshell, and try to keep the remarks short for now, and we can engage in a dialogue with the audience. I'll kind of start off with that.
Tim, your African Development Bank is one of the most important investors in terms of the intergovernmental organizations, certainly most important investor in Africa. What's the investment climate, and tell me what are the directions, that the priorities that the ADB is taking, excuse me.
Steve, thank you.
Okay. Well, why don't I go to, while you're doing that, we work on, Benicio, your Obrecht is one of the world's largest conglomerates. You're also doing a lot of investment in Africa. What's driving that investment? What do you see as the future for companies, Brazilian companies, but other companies in Africa?
First of all, it's working? No? It's not working. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you very much, Organization of American States, for the invitation. Mr. Sousa and his team done a fantastic job. Odebrecht is a company has about 60 years old. We are operating in Africa since 85, so almost 30 years. We right now operate in about 8 countries in Africa, almost the same number that we operate in Latin America. However, the amount of business that we do in Africa, it's still much smaller than we do in Latin America. We are working very hard to bridge the Atlantic and to improve the number and diversity of business that we have in Africa. We are investor in several sectors in Angola. We have a supermarket, we have shopping centers, we partner with the government in diamond mining. So, and we're very pleased that I think it's very timely now to have this kind of conference to bridge even more the Atlantic between Americas and Africa. We see Africa as huge opportunities, the same we see in Latin America. We are creating now a new division only to focus in Africa. Before that, we have a kind of fragmented, several people taking care about different countries. Now we have a single presidence only dedicated for Africa, which for us is very important. This decision was taken last year. So we are very happy to be in the continent. It's one of the main focus of Odebrecht right now. We are working in Angola, Mozambique, the Portuguese language. We have a lot of geopolitical ties with Brazil. Brazilian Development Bank has been working very hard to support us there. Now we try to engage also the World Bank to support and to promote not only finance but also technical cooperation. And we see a lot of opportunities, Liberia, Libya, Guinea. So there is a lot of mining, heavily infrastructure, agriculture. You know, Africa was united with Latin America. So physically, I mean. And there is a lot of opportunities in the agricultural sector because the soil and the weather have very similar patterns of Brazil. So basically, one of the main initiatives that we're taking, we bring in Embrapa from Brazil to try to develop sugarcane, ethanol plantations, and coffee in countries that share similar oil conditions with soil conditions with Brazil. So there's a lot of opportunities in the oil, sugarcane, infrastructure, real estate, health, education, and we have just come here to collect some awards that we have about public-private partnerships, which is basically a midterm between public projects and full concessions. And we are very happy that we saw Africa also developing PPPs, what we call, that we see that it's a very interesting development that we can replicate more in Africa.
Okay. Tim, back to you, not only in terms of what's happening at ADB, but what are the challenges to investment? Because financing is just very, very difficult for companies to get at times. And you're one of the leading financiers in that regard. Who uses the ADB? How open is it to the Western Hemisphere? We've heard a lot that it's not easy for Western Hemisphere companies to be able to use the ADB.
Stephen, first of all, let me, on behalf of President Donald Kaberuka, thank you very much for the invitation. He wanted to be here himself personally, was unable to do so. The African Development Bank for the past 10 years or so has placed the development of the private sector and development through the private sector at the centerpiece of its long-term strategy. When President Kaberuka joined the bank as president in 2005, our activities in the private sector represented about $200 million of new business a year. We're averaging closer to $2 billion of new business a year, so a tenfold increase. And that is a combination of, one, a much better enabling environment. We have opportunities for financing in the private sector have grown tremendously. That has attracted investors such as Odebrecht and many, many others to the continent. It's also sparked demand from African entrepreneurs who are growing their own businesses, indigenous entrepreneurs. And that's leading to, in fact, quite a significant change in the sort of the balance of institutions such as the African Development Bank. And I think other sister institutions, say the Inter-American Development Bank, are feeling those same large secular trends where the private sector, the growth is so strong. How do we transform ourselves to be able to respond to those market dynamics? The public sector side of the institution is increasingly focused on what we call the enabling environment, improving the investment climate. They work directly with governments at the policy level, the regulatory level. On the private sector side, we tend to be focused more on direct financing of transactions with the objective of creating a demonstration effect. And you know, I've been with the African Development Bank now for 16 years, and I can say that I've seen this growth that is very, very real. And Africa is at a turning point where it's sort of, maybe the right word is a lift-off point, where the demand for financing now is so large that traditional financiers, in particular the public sector, are just not able to keep up. And you know, we've talked about sustained growth of 5–6% across the continent for the past decade. What that has led to is now significant constraints at pretty much all the major types of infrastructure, whether it be power, ports, rail, other transportation, and more generally, which is either a challenge, as a potential constraint, because it's causing, you know, the cost of doing business, competitiveness issues for Africa, but it's also a tremendous opportunity. We're seeing the private sector increasingly willing and able to design, operate, and finance infrastructure projects across the continent. We are seeing a demand from players, the major players such as Blackstone, Carlyle, that we, you know, 10, 15 years ago, you just didn't see them. They are now coming to the continent. It's also very interesting, earlier discussions about South-South investment. The wave of Asian investment, whether it be China, India, Singapore, remarkable. And we're starting to see that flow coming from Latin America. And as was said earlier, there's a very logical connection, particularly in the agribusiness sector, between Latin America and Africa. Similar climatic conditions, similar soil. We are expecting to see Brazil become a major, major player in agribusiness across the continent, where apparently globally about 70% of the unused arable land on the planet is in Africa. That's a tremendous opportunity for investment.
Thank you. Tim, you also have a meeting at the World Bank, so if you have to leave early, and so I just want the audience to understand that it's an important meeting for you, so thank you.
Yeah.
Frank Nweke took this on very unexpectedly this morning and somewhat reluctantly, but I know that the Nigerian Economic Summit Group is the most important business group in the largest market in Africa. Frank heads that. He was very, very gracious to be a part of this today, because I think that you need to understand what are the opportunities in basically what's 1/4 the population of sub-Saharan Africa. So Frank, tell us what you want to say about Nigeria, what's going on in Nigeria.
Well, thank you. Well, certainly, one thing I must say this morning is that any business, any part of the world, any part of Africa, if you're not in Nigeria, you're not in Africa, or you're indeed not in the African market. That's what's really going to underpin my submissions. But on a more, you know, that's what I want to say. But more importantly, I just want to commend Steve and then the organizers of this conference for this initiative. I think that this is one very important way to really challenge and indeed really challenge the primordial sentiments about Africa and about its people. I believe that unless you come out there, unless you open your minds, you continue to deny yourselves the opportunity to really expand your business, your businesses, and therefore really see for yourselves that a whole lot of the things you read in the Western media are not really the way they are. And I think in a way, these things are already happening. And when I listen to the Director General of I forget his name now, the gentleman.
Comesa.
Yeah, Comesa. I was very pleased with the thrust of his intervention. The dynamics have changed completely. Whether you're looking at it strictly from the traditional energy sector, where a few countries in Africa a few years ago, you know, were the major players. Today, the global energy architecture, as far as we're concerned, is changing because of very important finds, not just in West Africa, but indeed in southern part and then some parts of East Africa as well. Talking about Nigeria specifically, you want to look at the size of this market, 167 million people. And so we're happy to say that out of every 10 Africans, 4 of them are Nigerians. So you can say that a quarter of that continent's population is really made up of Nigerians. And then you look at the size of that market, it's just incredible. So that whatever area that you choose to invest in, you can be sure that you're going to get significant returns in this sector. Now, out of this 167 million people, about 68 million of those are young people under the age of 30. And so that also guarantees that that Nigeria in particular, and indeed most parts of Africa, have some of the youngest populations in the world. And then if you're familiar with statistics, these kinds of things interest you, you're going to find that in the next 20 years, 25 years, Africa is going to retain some of the youngest populations in the world. So that sort of guarantees that you have a market that you're going to tap for a very long time. I must also talk about the expanding middle class in Africa. Today, there's been a major entrance by the major retail brands like Shoprite from South Africa, the major telecommunication companies like MTN. In less than 12 years of investing, say, in Nigeria, for instance, right? I think MTN has come to rely on Nigeria for about 25% of its entire global earnings. This was a company that was literally unknown in the preceding 12 years. Now, that's the kind of thing that can happen. And when I speak about Africa, Nigeria specifically, I can assure you that whether it's in Ghana or in Rwanda or in Botswana, most of these demographics, most of these statistics also hold true. Now, in terms of specific areas where you can make investments, the agricultural sector is receiving tremendous push from the Jonathan administration. And again, it makes sense, any which way you look at it. How do you want to feed a population of 167 million people? And so today we have the Cargills and the Carlyles and the rest of them also looking into that sector. Government is working very hard to try to encourage the exploitation of the entire value chain of agriculture so that we move away from the era when only primary commodities were exported or consumed with very little value that is created for the people. Again, the opportunity in Africa, again, is as a consequence of the, rather slow pace of development. And so whilst, yes, you might criticize us for there's not sufficient power, the roads are not so good, the ports are not so good, therein really lies the opportunity. And so in my country, Nigeria, 167 million people, we've had to struggle with just about 4,000 megawatts of electricity for a very long time. And so in the last year and a half, two more like, the government has sort of pushed a very aggressive program on privatization of the power sector, and we've seen interest from major sectors. And so we're talking about an economy that requires as much as, say, 40,000 megawatts of electricity in the next 10 to 15 years. And so if you look at it from the perspective of the fact that in spite of these challenges, the lack of electricity, the lack of some of the critical infrastructure you need, the country is growing at about 6.75%. Our economy is growing at the rate of 6.75%. It's one of the highest on the continent. Now, look at it from this perspective again. What happens if we're able to improve power, for instance, by as much as, say, 20-30%? What's going to happen, for instance, if we got the rail infrastructure running from the southern part of the country to the northern part of the country? And these are the places where these are the sectors, in my view, where I believe that the greatest opportunities lie. Again, because of the size of our population, you need to look at, say, telecoms again, and then ICT. These young people, 2-3 phones at the same time, all some of the most sophisticated gadgets that you can think about. And you can be sure that it's going to be growing, it's going to be expanding. So tremendous opportunities lie in Nigeria, lie on the continent, and I believe that South American states, American states have great opportunity on this continent, but more so in Nigeria. Those would be my initial comments.
Thank you. I'm glad you lost your reluctance too. So, Mr. Minister, you've heard what Frank has had to say on Nigeria, and of course the West Africa region is just booming in terms of opportunities. He also pointed out, though, that well, there isn't a country in Africa, including South Africa, that's meeting its current power needs, which goes to what Secretary Akwete said about the need for stronger infrastructure, which represents opportunities. What's Ghana doing to address that?
Well, thank you very much. I think that the points that were made are very important. And it is a point that I think we cannot lose out on. Anytime you think about Africa, or you think about a country in Africa, you must look at that country in the whole sub-region's perspective. And that is the strategic direction that Ghana has been working on. We've been working with the West Africa Power Pool, for example, when it comes to the energy sector to address the issue of electricity. Ghana has moved to increase, for example, accessibility. In the last 20 years, we've moved to about 75% accessibility. Generation capacity has been a challenge. We've been addressing that. But we also realize that we cannot address our generation issues just in the context of Ghana alone. We must do it in the context of the sub-region. And so we are working closely with the countries around us. There's, as I speak, a West Africa Power Pool that is working on transmission across the sub-region. We are also working in different areas. As I speak, gas transmissions coming from Nigeria. And generation that we need in Ghana currently is 2,500. We need to increase it to 5,000. But almost countries like Togo, Benin are all relying on Ghana. So we have to multiply what they need to what we need as well. And so investment in generation, for example, in Ghana must be looked at in the context of the sub-region. But the opportunity that exists in Ghana is that because of the fundamentals and because of the things we've done right in Ghana, it becomes really the focal point of this investment, to push this investment for the sub-region. And I'm happy that my good friend from Nigeria is here. We and Nigeria are working very closely. These are the big guys, but a small guy that is always challenging Nigeria to the art. And I'm very excited that the things we are doing are exciting Nigeria, and we are working closely together in these areas. But the opportunities are clearly in the energy sector. We need to increase generation capacity, and that must be done not only in Ghana, but to the sub-region. We must increase opportunities in agribusinesses. If you look at the losses between the farmer and the customer, there it's very, very sad. And the opportunities to use technology to ensure food security, not only in Ghana, but in the sub-region, is clearly there. Clean energy solutions that are being talked about, it's an opportunity that we need. In Ghana, we've moved ahead and passed the Renewable Energy Act with all those key provisions that allow private sector to come in and be sure that they can recover the cost of production. So those opportunities are clearly in the sub-region. Ghana is trying to be the leader of the sub-region to make sure that, as we've done in the last 20 years, to tell all of our friends, all of our partners that we have done the right things in terms of ensuring a stable democracy, the rule of law exists, and transparency in institutions that would drive this development. And that is the kind of efforts that all of our countries around are heading. And I believe the points that have been made here this morning is very clear. We are no longer bound by those old barriers. We want to go to where the opportunities are. And I think that this forum is very exciting for us, because if you look at the Americas and you talk about our shared history, our shared experiences, it is very clear that businesses from these areas, when they come to Ghana, they can even succeed more than others. And I think the opportunities are clearly there.
As I was thinking about it, probably the largest investor in Africa in Brazil, if you take the oil companies out of the equation. And I think even if you put the Brazilian oil companies in, your company is certainly one of the largest investors in Africa from Brazil, and perhaps a lot of Latin America. What advice do you offer? What kind of obstacles do you also deal with? Would regionalization, for instance, make a difference to your company? Are you working with that? What advice do you have to companies who are here wanting to really look at investing in Africa?
Hello? Yeah, we have a very clear strategy when we are looking for a project in another country, as much as we have in Brazil. Basically, the main thing is that we are looking for a good relationship between the host country and Brazil. Investments are for long term. Sometimes the project that only on the construction phase, it takes sometimes 4 to 5 years. So we have to survive different governments. So we make sure that the project is a priority for the country as well. We engage the local community. We have We believe that the world is growing, and it's going to be growing. It's not going to be linear. There's some bumps here and there. But we believe also in social inclusion. So we set a policy that every project we involve with it, we have a social program. And we engage with the local people. We want, you see, we want to be seen not as a multinational or a Brazilian company. We want to be seen as a local company. We don't do opportunistic strategy. We do long-term strategies. For example, we have been in Angola for 28 years. We endured the civil war, and we are there in the country, and we're not going anywhere. We want to stay, and we want to contribute to the development of the country. So we have a very rich cultural and philosophical entrepreneurship. And I think the companies that are looking for those markets are not easy. They are prone to change like any other markets. I remember that during the crisis in the civil war in Angola, that we are determined to help the conciliation of the country. So I think one of the most important things that companies have to be in mind when going overseas is that you have to be committed with the country. It's a broader view than only opportunistic view.
Do you think that there's a far greater interest in Latin America, and particularly Brazil, in investing in Africa overall?
Excuse me.
Do you think there's greater interest now in Brazil from the private sector in investing in Africa, or is it just you as a single company, or do you see many companies?
No. Yeah, we see a lot of other companies invested in Africa and elsewhere, also in Latin America and in Asia. We want to see more small and medium-sized enterprises. Investing overseas it's a very complex equation. You say, well, why you not invest in my home country that I'm much more comfortable? So you need the structure, you need human resources, you need logistics, and it's not easy. So you see in Brazil, I would say that large corporations are looking to Africa as one of the main areas of growth and opportunity. But you do not see small and medium-sized enterprises also looking to go there, because Brazil is so vast, there's so many opportunities in Brazil that they don't have the right incentives to go there. So we are trying to, when we go to Africa or to other countries in Latin America, we try to bring small and medium enterprises with us. So there's leverage effect, so I don't know, in 5 or 10 years, they're gonna be able to go alone. But at least for the first cycle, it's important that you have the right partner to push you along in order to leverage them and perhaps develop in the near term the capacity to go along.
Frank, Vinicio has talked about the need working also with the governments. How does the private sector, and in the case of Nigeria, the private sector and the Nigerian government work together, or do they? Does the private sector move on its own? Is it you must go through government first, or if I'm an outside investor?
Make me feel bad because we are not in Nigeria. But with your help, we will get in there, right?
Well, I hope you're going to come along with me tomorrow when I fly back. Yeah, sure. But, you know, back home in Nigeria, I mean, we have an extremely dynamic private sector. And there's no place under the surface of the sun today that if you were to go to, you will not find Nigerians who are engaged in one kind of business or the other. Whether it's in the Caribbean or in the southernmost part of the Americas or in the northernmost parts of the world, whatever, you're going to find Nigerians there. And but you know, the major players have two options. One, you find a lot of them who go out to countries on their own, and I think that Nigeria is one of the countries where governments, I must confess, have shown the least commitment to, say, taking the private sector along to a lot of countries where they go to. And I will explain the context in which I speak. There are a lot of countries, for instance, in which, say, America has invested militarily, or for lack of a better way to put it. And what happens? Subsequently, the private sector moves in there. Okay? But if you look at what happened with, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Angola, whether it's Namibia, whether it's Sierra Leone, Liberia, whether it's Sao Tome, in all the places where Nigeria has played major and significant roles militarily to resolve one conflict or the other, Nigeria's private sector are not exactly playing big in those areas. Now, this is a failing on the part of government, because all of us know that, yes, economic diplomacy. Yes, I'm going to do this, but I know that I'm going to get something in return for it. Not too many people want to hear this, but that's the fact of the matter. So you have a private sector that, yes, government somewhat tries, but not in the way that you would expect. And so you also have this private sector, very dynamic, highly exposed, very adventurous, who venture out on their own. A very important question put to me by an immigration official yesterday. He said, oh, Nigerian? I said, yes. He says, do you know Aliko? Do you know Dangote? I said, I was wondering, what's this gentleman to stamp the passport and let me get out of here? And I said to him, how did you know this guy? He said, but I read these things. Aliko is the richest man in Africa, according to Forbes magazine. Aliko Dangote, who also sits on the board of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, is a player in the cement industry, is a player in the power industry, is a player in the food and beverages sector. He makes pasta, he makes all sorts of things. And he is in different parts of Africa. I think he's also in Ghana, he's in Zambia, he's in a whole lot of places. I think Guinea is in Guinea as well. He's in a whole lot of countries there. Now, this gentleman has this multinational corporation he has built, has all sorts of nationalities working for him. He's there. He's not alone. There are the major financial institutions who are also playing there. So, Steve, I don't know if that answers your question, but one of the reasons why we're here today is, why I had to make it here, is because we had never really thought about South America in the way that you presented it today. And we thought that this opportunity presents a great, it's a great opportunity for members of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, major businesses, to also begin to look that way, maybe in a more organized way. So again, Steve, I'd like to pay my respects to yourselves and then the organizers of this conference.
Thank you, Frank. Mr. Dangote, by the way, has also joined the board of the Corporate Council in Africa.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
We're very happy about that. I'm going to ask the panelists to take 1 minute, and then we will close, to take 1 minute to say because they're taking their time to be here, what is the one message you want to get out to the audience, Mr. Minister?
Gone. Oh, is it good? All right. I think this forum is a very great opportunity. I believe that we have to move on it. The opportunity that exists between Africa and the Americas is great, and I think that our backgrounds, our common history, and our experiences are real leverage we can. But these are what, in my view, are the real opportunities and what you need to do to succeed in Africa. Companies that will have to go to Africa to do business must be prepared to go there and stay in the long term. It is also very clear that governments in Africa, especially in West Africa, understand clearly that the only way private investment and growth can happen is to make sure that all the bottlenecks are taken away from the public sector. And so there's real recognition by government, especially in Ghana, that we must have a very effective public sector to ensure a very effective private sector. There are huge opportunities that exist. In Ghana, for example, in the last 2 years, 19 discoveries. It is projected that about $10 billion is going to be spent in the upstream sector alone. There are competing interests from all parts of the world coming to Africa. And I think the time has come for countries in the Americas to take advantage of it. We in Africa are not waiting. We are going to where the opportunities are. We are very anxious that in this century, we are going to make sure that our people are also empowered. And we are going to do that with you. Thank you very much.
I'm told we have 3 minutes, so Madam Secretary, what is it you would like this on? What does the Obama administration want to say?
My 1-minute message is we're quite bullish, very, very bullish on Africa. And we're really bullish with the democratic trends that are happening in Africa. One of the important initiatives that the president has is the Young African Leadership Initiative, where we're looking to develop the entrepreneur skills and Africa's current leaders and future leaders. So we're very bullish.
Working now? Okay. I think the main message is that it's important to have partnerships. It's important to have a long-term vision. Sometimes the short-term vision constrains a lot new possibilities. And Odebrecht is very committed with the continent. And we are not in Nigeria, but we are in Ghana. And we want to do much more. And we are here to serve the governments and to partner with the private sector in order to contribute to the development of the continent. It's our brotherhood, right? Latin America and Africa, I think, share so many ties that it's going to be great to grow together.
Thank you, Frank.
I'd like to encourage the adoption of partnership as a strategy for engagement in Africa. And I say this strictly from the experience of my country with the oil companies that have come. I believe that if you were to find credible local partners, that would be one way to secure your business. That would be one way to really push your business forward. And so please, when you do think of coming, I would advise very strongly, I would encourage you to please consider very seriously seeking out the right partners and working with them. It's going to give a sense of ownership, it's going to give a sense of respect and dignity, and it's going to help you protect this business in the long term.
Thank you. And I would say that in regard to Washington, we've just come out, the Corporate Council has come out with policy recommendations for the Obama administration. There are some back there if you'd like to take them with you. But it was a very good panel. I want to thank you very much. I also want to recognize Lucien Bradette, who is from our sister organization in Canada, to be here as well. No questions, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Lucien, we've got to close it off.
Very rapidly. I was in Ghana and Nigeria about a month ago, and the story was about the following. Ghana and Nigeria are competitors for sure, but Ghana is the entry, the gateway to Africa, and Nigeria is a destination. So.
Thank you. All right, thank you, and thank the panel, and we're ready for the next panel. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to invite you to take your seats. The second panel is going to begin in 1 minute. That would be the panel on America's Africa Partnerships, Challenges and Opportunities. All right, Ambassador.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I invite you to take your seats? And I'm going to invite everybody outside to come inside and take their seats. So I'm sure some people can help us with that from the organization. Those who are outside, please come in. This is a very high-level powered panel, and it doesn't cost you anything. So please come inside. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue with the program, and we'll speak in this panel about the partnerships from a practical perspective, the partnerships in terms of challenges, but certainly we want to be positive and focus on opportunities. So we have in our panel this morning the Director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean of the Washington office, Dr. Ines Bustillo. We have the Vice President for Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean of the International Finance Corporation, Dr. Jean-Philippe Prosper. Congratulations on your appointment. Mr. Lorenzo Omo Aligbe, the General Counsel of Sky Bank in Nigeria, and I'm sure we'll hear some practical ideas on how to promote business. Jean-Louis Ekra, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of the African Export-Import Bank, and Imad Bibawi, partner of the US-Africa KPMG, United States. So this is a very hands-on panel. We want to focus, and we want to ask all panelists to focus on the issue at hand, the challenges and opportunities in doing business with Africa, as well as from African side in doing business with the Americas. I would hope, given the introductory speeches this morning, we have the context, so we don't need to go into the context. We know that there are opportunities. At the same time, we know that there are obstacles and experiences that needs to be shared, and this is what I'm looking for. But to put it a bit further in context, I would invite Ines to speak about the trends and the experience so far with trade investments between both regions. This is the first study, in my view, done at such a level between both continents. So this is a preliminary study which needs to be expanded, but we hope that later in the day we can provide you with a copy, but the first conclusions will be drawn by Dr. Ines Bustillo. Ines.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Ramdin. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning. And Alicia Bárcena, ECLAC's Executive Secretary, asked me to convey her regards. She unfortunately could not be here with you today. As Ambassador Ramdin was saying, what will be distributed later on is a report on economic relations between the Americas and Africa. This is the report. And it's an attempt to capture what is going on in terms of trade and investment flows between both regions, capture, as Ambassador Ramdin was saying, the opportunities as well as the challenges. And the report also captures very well what the speakers were saying this morning. And I will just briefly, I was told to do this very briefly, present some of the highlights and conclusions of the report. In the area of trade, we've heard that trade is expanding, but still is very limited, is very incipient. For most countries of the Americas, Africa accounts just for less than 1% of total exports or imports of goods. Now, trade between both regions, and it was also highlighted earlier on, is limited to a handful of countries: United States, Brazil, Argentina, and Canada in the Americas, Egypt, South Africa, Algeria, Nigeria in Africa mostly. And it's also limited in terms of the products being exchanged. It's mostly trade in commodities. In the case of Latin America, 9 of the 10 main commodities exported to Africa, which account for 57% of the total, are agricultural goods, while petroleum and fuels comprise 77% of total imports. Canada and the United States have a more balanced trade distribution, with more manufactured goods accounting for a greater share of exports to Africa. Now, in terms of the institutional framework in which trade takes place, is also very incipient, as evidenced by the low number of interregional total trade agreements, whether signed or under negotiation. So it's limited, but it's expanding, and there's a great potential. Now, in terms of investment, also in recent years, we've seen a growing number of US companies seeking to play a stronger role in Africa. Also in Latin America, we have a phenomenon that we call the translatinas, Latin American companies of Latin American origin that have been growing and investing mostly in Latin America, but are seeking to invest in other parts of the world. And of course, Africa is a great attraction. Now, both in the case of Latin America and Africa, we face a similar type of challenge, not only to attract more foreign direct investment, but invest more, but also we want more quality investment, as it was highlighted earlier on. So it's a matter of encouraging quality investment in the region. Now, though of course the study looks also at tourism and other economic links. But what are the conclusions? There's ample growth and potential for growth in trade and investment between Africa and the Americas. And the majority of countries in both regions are looking to expand this type of connections. It was already mentioned earlier on, the demographic weight of those regions in the years to come, the expanding middle class, and the potential for success in terms of linking both populations. Now, the challenges were also being mentioned. Despite this huge potential that both regions have in the years to come, there are several challenges mentioned in the area of regulations, in the area of infrastructure, etc. But also the report points to that there are opportunities in facing together those challenges through greater integration. Let me leave with that, Ambassador Ramdin, and I'm looking forward to the other panelists.
Thank you very much, Ines, and I'm very happy that you stuck to the 3 minutes. It's a good example to the rest. And I'll keep track of that. But in the context of what Ines has said, Felipe from the IFC, would you like to indicate your experience, your company's experience, the IFC's experience, in terms of investments from the Americas in Africa, but also the experience from the IFC in promoting investments from Africa into this sub-region?
Thank you very much. I will start by saying what most of you may have seen in the papers recently. Africa, frankly, is one of the places to go right now. We have seen a lot of improvement. I'm trying to give the basic of the reasons. As IFC, for example, I would say for the past at least 10 years, we have been much involved in a lot of the reforms on the investment climate, and so have been our colleagues from the World Bank. And we have started to see some of the dividends of the progress that many African countries have done, particularly on the side of the investment climate. It's how we have seen that it's really in terms of investment, how they have been able to attract investment, and frankly, which has translated in terms of growth. Most African countries, I say on average of sub-Saharan Africa today, it's about 5 to 6%, and it's predicted it will continue over the next few years and probably more. Certain countries like Mozambique or others are growing at 8%. So really, it's a continent on the move. And we have seen that ourselves, IFC, directly in terms of our activities. I would say as recent as 2004, we are doing roughly around $140 million worth of investment in Africa. I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa, by the way, because for us, that's the way we classify it. So North Africa is different, is a different group for us. But focusing on sub-Saharan Africa, I would say that last year we invested $4 billion in sub-Saharan Africa, and this fiscal year we'll probably invest anywhere between $4.5 and $5 billion. In Latin America, things are also going relatively well, at least in terms of FDI or investment. For us, I would say for IFC, it's still the largest regions in terms of investment. Last year, we invested $5 billion, and this year we'll probably invest at least 5.5. So those actually are the two fastest growing regions for us at IFC. What we have seen recently, it's more interest coming from Latin America. But frankly, it's way behind Asia. I mean, most of foreign direct investment that we are having in Africa today is coming from Asia. However, we have seen Latin America coming more and more, but particularly from a country like Brazil. And in the case of Brazil, for the time being, it has been primarily in the Lusophone country, Portuguese-speaking countries. We have seen the companies like the Vale, or like the Odebrecht, whether it's Angola or Mozambique and in others. And there's been a particular effort actually from Brazil to really invest more in Africa, and that effort was spearheaded by President Lula himself, and actually he's still pushing for that. So basically, in summary, I would say there's still a lot of, there are a lot of opportunities going on in sub-Saharan Africa. And again, some of the reasons, definitely better investment climate, but also improving governance, less conflicts. We still have some issues. Yeah, you saw what happened in Mali recently, and we see from time to time, we know what had happened in Guinea-Bissau, but overall, I mean, there are less conflict. And on our advisory side, for example, as IFC, we have investment climate in 40 countries out of 49. So really, that's what I would say really within the 3 minutes of summary, and happy to address any issue that could be raised.
Thank you very much. I'm sure just now we will have many questions from the audience, and I want to focus on an interactive dialogue with the audience. But let's go to Mr. Lorenzo Omo from a banking perspective. What is the situation? How do we promote more investments, and how do you create more trust between both regions?
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's my pleasure to represent the chairman of Skybank, who unfortunately couldn't be here. And as a follow-through to the former speakers, I would want to focus primarily not just on the banking sector, but essentially to a historical perspective coming from the period of slavery and slave trade to the time when in the 18th century you had these...
You know we have only 3 minutes for that.
I know. We'll get there very shortly. Africa is the center of the world. And as the former speaker, Frank Weke, had said, You haven't started investing in Africa if you do not come to Nigeria. And because of the deregulation that has happened in the banking sector, as well as the institution of strong corporate governance, it makes sense that as a fulcrum for investment, the banking sector is not just ripe for FDI, but also representing a bank that has close to $1 billion in asset base with over 260 branches growing in the West African sub-region. It makes a great deal of sense that banking as a function of financial services and as a way of investing in the larger economy is an institution whereby the Organization of African States as well as other foreign countries can come and do business. It's rather unfortunate that a lot of countries do not believe the Cold War has ended. So what has happened is the Chinese, as well as Asians generally, they have muscled their way into banking, into agriculture, into mining. We have a great deal of historical relationship with the Organization of African States, especially the Caribbean, and we believe that the diaspora experience will need to be exploited. I'll have more to say after the other panelists speak, so as not to exhaust my time limit.
I take note of that you want to come back. I will go to Mr. Jean-Louis Ekra. In terms of your statement about the expansion of the banking sector in Africa, and in particular your bank, it's always encouragement or a good sign when a bank wants to expand and creates opportunities. That in itself is a good sign. So leaving that as it is, and I'm sure there will be questions to you later on, we go to Mr. Jean-Louis Ekra, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of the other development-oriented bank, I would say, African Export and Import Bank. Jean-Louis.
Well, first of all, let me say that this meeting is timely in my view. Just about 3 weeks ago, I attended the annual meeting of the Inter-American Development Bank in Panama. And we held a meeting, myself, the chief executive of BLADEX, and the chief executive of CAF, which are regional institutions like ours, in order to set up an agenda for promoting trade between Latin America and Africa.
So we can send a bill to you?
We will share it, split it in three. You can send the bill and we'll split it in three. CAF will take his share, we'll take our share, and BLADEX will take our share. And that's what trade is about, by the way, it is sharing. Our institution was established about 20 years ago. Actually, we will be celebrating our 20th anniversary in a couple of months. Essentially to promote trade between Africa and the rest of the world, with the primary objective of diversifying African trade. Diversifying African trade not only in terms of destination of trade, which is largely marked by historical past, but also diversify the trade in terms of the composition of what is traded. Some of those speakers before me I've mentioned, and including the report, that African trade still is dominated by export of commodities. So it's very important that we diversify that composition if we are to expand Africa's shares of global trade. The value of this commodity is the lower value in the chain. So when you account for that, it's normal that African trade still is at a level of 3% or 3 to 4% of global trade. And in diversifying the destination, you will be able to have a more stable global trading environment. because there are merits in diversification. The areas where we think there will be potential for diversifying this African trade, first of all, is the agribusiness. You will notice that in our bank, we don't like to talk about agriculture. We talk about agribusiness because we see agriculture as another business. It cannot be anything else. If you want to expand agriculture, it has to be a business. So you have agribusiness and the food industry that goes with it. And some of the precedent speakers have also talked about the large potential of Africa's land. We see also in a lot of potential in the energy sector. Whether you talk about electricity or even in production of oil and so on and so forth. So we at Afrexim Bank would like to really sit at the forefront of that initiative, of that goal of diversifying the trade between Africa and the rest of the world. And for what concerns us today is to diversify the trade with the Americas.
Thank you very much. I think the earlier point you raised, Jean-Louis, about collaboration among the development banks, the sub-regional development banks, is important in fostering such a strengthened commercial partnership between both sides. I would hope that in subsequent talks in the future, and this could be one of the recommendations coming out of this meeting, is if the sub-regional development banks, both in Africa and in the Americas, could meet and have a special window for investments to promote partnerships between both regions, that would be a concrete way of fostering, together with the global IFCs and others and the commercial banks, to foster that partnership.
Actually, we do have what we call the global network of Exim Bank and Development Finance Institution, which was established in 2006 by UNCTAD, and we are meeting on a regular basis in order to foster South-South trade. And I'm currently the chairman of this global network.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The last panelist is equally a practitioner, Emat Bibawi, partner of KPMG. And in the discussion before the meeting, we spoke about what he would want to share, but there are so many issues, but I asked him to share with us the practical, positive approaches to strengthening this partnership. So I hope he can give us some good examples.
I will. Thank you very much. And like many here, I echo the thanks for the Embassy and Government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Organization of American States for hosting this conference. And I represent KPMG here. I'm a partner in our practice in the United States, responsible for the inbound and outbound work between the United States and Africa and the United States and the Middle East. But that is part of a larger practice for high growth markets, where we're looking at all of these markets, whether it's China, Brazil, India, and others, and increasing that collaboration between the United States and those markets, but also between those markets and each other. So aside from that, I think if we can step away for a second, there's also a very personal story that I'd like to share with all of you, if you indulge me in just a couple of seconds. This conference is inspirational. It's fantastic. I'm Egyptian as well as I am American. I spent the first 18 years of my life growing up in Ethiopia, and I left Ethiopia in 1989. And everything we've talked about today resonates very much with one country that's an example of what's happening across the African continent. Ethiopia in 1989, when I moved to the United States, was still a communist country. It was considered one of the poorest countries in the world. It was just coming out of a famine, and all of us recognized Ethiopia and Africa as that, oh, poor Africa. Fast forward 25 years later, I was there 3 months ago. Ethiopia is one of the fastest growing economies on the African continent, but also one of the fastest growing in terms of percentage around the world. When you look at the people in Ethiopia today and the rising middle class and the purchasing power that the Ethiopians have, it's phenomenal. And for those that have been there, just go to the Addis Ababa Hilton and you will see that the people in the middle class are more Ethiopian than they were 20 25 years ago, which was foreigners. So Africa is hopeful. And I have an Economist article here for all of you that have seen it. In March, they basically are talking about Africa as the aspiring Africa, the hopeful Africa. Rewind 25 years ago, and that's not the headline that they would have had for Africa. So why we're here today is personal, but it's also inspiring to see this kind of emphasis on a continent that is deep-rooted in history and just a fantastic continent. So thank you for hosting it, and thank you for having it. But in terms of KPMG, KPMG is one of the largest advisory firms in the world. We've got over 150, we're represented in over 150 countries. We've got 140,000 people. So all of these statistics means we can do a lot of work in a lot of countries, and we do it very, very well. The other part of it, in Africa specifically, we have about 8,500 people and are growing at double-digit rates across the African continent. We've been there for 60 to 100 years and advise and work with companies of all sizes and all industries. And all of the industries that were talked about here today are growing and in fact creating new business models that the rest of the world is looking at. So look at the technology sector. Africa is no longer putting pipelines and cabling as we did in the West. Africa is moving to mobile technology for payments, for communication, ahead of what some of the Western countries are doing. You look at the infrastructure of Africa, although a lot of people talk about it being as a challenge, but Africa infrastructure is growing phenomenally and creating my voice carries, so even if this goes, I will continue talking. The Chinese are investing heavily in Africa in the infrastructure, and that trade between China and Africa is becoming so strong that the African continent isn't looking at the West anymore as the foundation for that growth. So I think when you look at KPMG's view and what we think are the three themes that we'd like to share with you on the opportunity of Africa, we've said it before, it's a massive opportunity. 6 of the fastest growing economies are African based. When you look at the African continent, I think what we all think of as one continent, it's not. There is diversity in Africa that is beyond what we have spoken about today. I think we look at Southern Africa, East Africa, West Africa. So I think in terms of advice, we all have to look at Africa in its uniqueness for those different regions. And I think in terms of challenges, we've mentioned that the banking infrastructure, I think needs to develop. Let's go back to the Ethiopia example. I have a friend of mine who went to Paris and was educated and moved back and has a consulting firm of 2,000 people. She is helping the Ethiopian government modernize their entire infrastructure. Her biggest challenge is I can't have enough liquidity and credit to grow my business. So the banking world needs to evolve. I think infrastructure itself, again, if we use Ethiopia as an example, moving product from where it's developed to other African countries or outside of Africa, that infrastructure also has to evolve. I'll give you 3 examples talking about practical in terms of companies that are thinking of engaging with Africa. So one company, global manufacturer, global chemical company, operates everywhere in the world and is starting to think about Africa, and it's a Fortune 500 company. Its biggest challenge is we want to do business in the right way. We want to operate effectively. And so legislation comes into play. FCPA issues come into play. How do we do that effectively? And that's a practical problem that those companies have to deal with. If you look at a consumer goods company, they are very present in Nigeria, and thank God they're very present in Nigeria. They're also very present in South Africa and others, but they're thinking of entering Ghana, Ethiopia, Namibia, and the question they're having is, we understand Africa, but those countries are so unique. How do we make our product have the right brand and the same brand that it has as it does in the rest of Africa and the rest of the world? How do we get that luxury brand to continue to stick as a luxury brand? And the third example is in the hospitality industry. Global chain of hotels, very present in a lot of African countries, but also trying to grow in some of the smaller African economies. Their biggest question is, how do we make it relevant for the local culture? How do we make our brand local for the people in those countries, and what kind of offerings do we have? We can't say it's a 5-star hotel because that's not going to resonate. Let's make our hospitality business relevant for the marketplace. So a lot of opportunity, a lot of challenges. I think from our side, we think this conversation 10 or 15 years ago, we would have been talking about China and Brazil and India. We have Africa ahead of us, and we should look forward to that. And we're very, very glad to be part of this. And thanks for having us. Thanks for the Corporate Council on Africa, and also Sunrise partners that have helped us develop some of the content on Africa. And I'm happy to share questions.
Thank you very much for those commercials as well.
It's part of what we do.
I know, and it's fine. I want to give an opportunity to the audience, our guests, to engage with the panel. I think we have time for 3 questions. So we'll take 3 questions at once. Please, no long introductions. The question as pointed as possible. And then we'll have a second round of reflections on these questions by the panel. Anyone who wants to start? Yes, please, Ambassador. A microphone is reaching you shortly.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I have not heard any mention as yet of the ASA group, the Group of Africa and South America, which came into existence just about 5-6 years ago, with its secretariat in Caracas and in Nigeria, which is one of the largest groupings of nations, the South American nations and the African nations, that are supposed to meet once every year, 1 year in South America, 1 year in Africa, in terms of, how that can fast track this question of the Americas and Africa, and also the need for the Caribbean, because I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, to be part of that ASA group. At present, the Caribbean is not part of that group of Africa and South American nations. It is my view, however, that the key to open the door to connect South Americas and Africa has to do with the direct air bridge. Ethiopia Airlines, only 2 weeks ago, has begun a direct flight to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, because Ethiopia Airlines is the #1 airline on the African continent. And that is to be commended. But what is needed now, as our Honorable Prime Minister stated, is for a direct flight latitudinally connecting the Caribbean with Africa. That is what is needed, all right? We have to virtually cut the umbilical cord that we have been tied to Europe and North America, because as you know, when a child is born, the first thing that is done, you cut that umbilical cord. So that Latin America and the Caribbean, we need now to engage directly in order to realize the benefits for people going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to the question of connectivity by air and sea. Ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Lois Tett from Africa Communicates and Majority Women-Owned Businesses. Congressman Donald Payne advised Nigeria one time at a conference. Chinese are very powerful. They're very smart. They're ahead of most of us. You at one time allowed them to bring in their cloth, and you have some of the most beautiful cloth in the world, and label it Nigeria. He said, you have to watch yourself. You just can't give them the world. You don't want to turn around and see that this is Chineria instead of Nigeria. You get what I'm saying? You keep control of your stuff. I know the Chinese are there and they're very helpful, they're very wise. Top them in India, ones for development and all, but you need Nigeria.
Thank you very much. I'm sure, let's take one more question and we'll come back to the panel.
Okay.
Any other question? If not, there is, the mic is, you have a question? First, Ambassador Antoine, and then we'll have one last one here in front.
My name is Bernadette Paolo. My question is...
Bernadette, you will speak first, but Ambassador will come after.
Certainly, sorry. My name is Bernadette Paolo. My question specifically is directed to Mr. Omo Aligbe. You talk about Sky Bank and the progress of the banking institutions in Nigeria and throughout West Africa, which we all welcome. But so many people can't get financing on the continent of Africa, which is a major liability, particularly for people with small businesses. Can you tell us what Sky Bank and other banking institutions are doing to address that issue?
Thank you very much. And then the last question, Ambassador Denis Antoine.
I'm with the University of the District of Columbia, and I have not heard anything about education, business education, as it relates to keeping up with the global business concept of growing and integrating. There is so much unemployment and undereducation among the youths of Africa. I would like to hear how that is addressed in the context of bringing along the future to engage in an informed way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think these are all very relevant questions, different in nature, but I believe they can all be addressed by the panel. I'm going to ask the panel to, well, some questions were specifically addressed to Mr. Jean-Louis and to Lorenzo. So let's start with those first. Okay. Lorenzo first on the Nigeria position.
I want to start with the question the gentleman from Trinidad and Tobago raised. I'm aware that our president visited Trinidad and Tobago sometime last year. A personal friend of mine called Godfrey Paul, I know, set up an institute in Trinidad for the training of the commissioned militants under the amnesty program. And the ambassador to Nigeria, Trinidadian ambassador to Nigeria, is currently in talks with the federal government of Nigeria with regards to setting up one of the existing carriers to have a direct flight between Nigeria and Trinidad. The most interesting aspect of your proposition is that if that airline establishes a route to Trinidad and Tobago, it will be one of the biggest trading routes both ways. Unfortunately, because of administrative bottlenecks, the talks are still ongoing. Now, addressing the issue of the Chinese, the points raised by the second questionnaire, I must admit that the Chinese will first colonize you with their food, and no race is actually absolved from that. Then they will set up their own Chinatowns. The luck we have is that they don't mix very well. But in terms of business, they do not discriminate. The Chinese, sorry for the use of the pun, they don't care about FCPA. They just want to do business. And whether you like it or not, as I said, the Cold War is over, and the Chinese will come with foreign direct investment. They will build your roads. They will take your commodities. They will supply their factories. But at the end of the day, they might leave you worse off than you found yourself. That is sentiment. The important thing is that they are there when you need them. So we must not kid ourselves. Africa needs trade. It doesn't need a handout. Quoting the words our friend from KPMG, the economist, it was in 2000, he said Africa was the hopeless continent. 2011, it was the rising continent. And that last edition of March says it's the hopeful continent. The fact is, whoever comes to Africa with help or comes to help we by nature are accommodating. Our spirit, by virtue of our customs and traditions, we actually welcome strangers. Whether those strangers will become inimical to our progress, it's another matter. But the fact is, the fastest growing economies, 6 of the fastest growing 10 economies in the world are in Africa. You have over 350 million folks, middle class, in the whole continent of Africa, competing with the Chinese. But as Frank Weke had said, 4 out of every 10 African is Nigerian. And 1 out of every 5 black person in the world is Nigerian. So charity should begin at home. And if I have to address the question from
Lorenzo,
Bernadette.
I'm listening carefully and with a lot of interest, very nice analysis. But can we maybe have a continuation of the discussion in the break so that we can finish the panel with all the other statements?
Okay, thank you very much.
As I said, we could have a long 3-hour discussion here.
Monologue. Okay.
Jean-Louis, very briefly on the regulatory framework.
On
the question from Bernadette in terms of...
Yes, it had to do with financing.
Oh, finance, yes. Go ahead.
Now,
but very brief, because...
Okay. The bank works closely, the Sky Bank works closely with the SMEs, the small and medium scale enterprises. And it takes directives from the central bank. Corporate governance is being highly and tightly regulated. It can only lend based on the policies it's given by the apex banking body, which is the central bank. But as we open up more branches within small community areas, we are actually restructuring the credit regimes. Yes. But I would stress for now that I'll give more answers after the other panelists.
Let's get 2 quick responses from Jean-Philippe Prosper and Mr. Jean-Louis. Jean-Louis, first.
Yes, well, I just wanted to take the point on the education, which I think is a very, very important point. You know, what has happened with the education system in Africa over the past 15, 20 years, partly as a result of the so-called structural adjustment programs. Many of our universities have been downgraded. And most people will now send their children outside Africa to study. And those children were staying there. They were staying in America, they were staying in Europe, instead of going back home because of the environment or perceived environment. But what we are seeing now is progressively a trend with graduates coming back, because if you look at the paper, the press, America is not growing many jobs, Europe is not growing at all, and so on. So the message is actually both ways. For those like you who are in the educational system in America, what can you do to help that exchange? I was talking just last week, Saturday last week, at New York University and Harvard, to talk to the young graduates and ask them to come back home. Because that growth that we are talking about means that we are creating jobs. So we will need people, educated people, to take on that job if we want to turn around the fate of this continent.
No, absolutely. Education is key for any successful development of a country. Jean-Philippe, Louis.
I'd like to talk a bit. Hear me?
Yes, he's...
Yeah, okay, good. About the SME point that you mentioned. Imagine that you are a banker, right? And you are lending money to somebody. You want to make sure that you understand the business and that you are going to be repaid. Or what many commercial banks do anyway. They try to have, if that doesn't happen, a lot of a high level of collateral. Now, why in certain countries they can lend to SMEs and others they don't? Basically, it's a matter of having access to information about the SMEs. If you look at a country, if you say like the US, like you live every day, you go a credit card and you're just on a phone call 24 hours or whatever it goes. It's because they have access to information about you. And they have what they establish a form of credit scoring and so on. So what we're trying to do ourselves, at least right now, particularly in Africa, but all over, is to try help establish what we call credit bureaus. In other words, those are systems that allows you to have access to that information. So once you have access to that kind of information, your utility bill, they know your phone bill, electricity, et cetera, all type of credit, so they have some information about you as a borrower, or let's say as your credit history. They can build some model and establish some credit scoring. It's happening more and more. Some institutions, for example, in Kenya, like Equity Bank, it's really going really down market. And Equity Bank is doing extremely well, this type of thing. So it's going to take time, but it's going to happen. But more importantly, the more competition that you have, the more it will happen. I can tell you I've seen it in Kenya. In 2004, it was almost very difficult. I mean, a bank like Barclays Bank, I'm taking as an example, was not going down market or Citibank. They were just only with corporate. Today, they have some of the largest SME segment in Kenya because there's a lot of competition. If I move to education, I think one thing it's key, we all agree it's important, but one thing we should not lose in mind, well, at least we should focus on, it's vocational training. Because frankly, you can have all kinds of PhDs, all kinds of degrees and what have you. At the end of the day, if what you need, it's 10 PhDs, but 3,000 plumbers, because you are building, you have to do that. And I think there should be a stronger partnership between business and the education system to know what are the needs, who are the type of people we have to prepare. Because otherwise, what happened in the Arab Spring, that's what's going to continue to happen. You have a lot of graduate people, but you don't know what to do with them.
Thank you very much. Ines, you wanted to add a point?
Just on the issue of the connectivity, in a few years, South-South trade will exceed North-North trade. If that means that there will be a greater demand for lower transportation costs and better connectivity. Supply will need to respond to that, and hopefully supply within our region will take care of that. At the same time, if we look at what has been happening, at least from Asia, Latin America, in the past 10 years, not only business has been growing and trade and exports, but also government-to-government links and also academic links. So I expect that in the years to come, not only business will grow between Africa and Latin America, but also that governments will get to share and get to know each other better and support that expanding business ties. And at the same time, universities and academic centers will learn more from each other. There's a lack of knowledge of each region, and we need information, we need knowledge to strengthen economic ties.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to leave it here because we have a luncheon coming up. And I would suggest that during the luncheon, you choose your partners to continue the discussion.
Not even 1 minute.
Not even half a second, no, 30 seconds.
I think one thing we all need to remember, these are all great questions and challenges, but Africa, you know, you can't become a first world country without taking the steps that we're all taking right now. Conferences like this and sessions like this is what's going to get us there. So on the education bit, go to the Harvard Business School conference on Africa. 1,300 people were there this year, and it's all about moving talent back into Africa. On the banking sector, it is evolving, but I think the most important theme that I think we're seeing is let's take the steps, and we're taking them in the right direction. That's very important to note.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. And let me conclude with 2 sentences. We have spoken about challenges and opportunities from different angles and with experience. Challenges can be overcome. We can work towards overcoming those. And I think a lot is being done both institutionally, regulatory, also in terms of investments and the opportunities. So it's a question of how do we make good use of the opportunities that exist. And that would be the message from me from this panel is, good news is that there is lots of attention, There's a good potential for growth. There's good potential for trade. And we have a lot of work ahead of us. And the best thing is to engage with the institutions, especially the financial sector, to make use of opportunities. I want to thank the audience. I want to thank the panelists. I know we could have gone for another 2 hours easily. I would like to, but I'm getting all kinds of messages from there. We are expecting the Prime Minister of the Republic of Haiti as one of the reasons. So I want to thank you and a round of applause for this panel. I have a message after that, so don't run. We will have now lunch, which is very important. But you can stay in the room. Let me do something which is much safer. I will ask our Chief of Protocol to explain what needs to be done before I get in trouble. I thank you all very much, and have a good lunch.
Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, we would respectfully request that you leave with all your belongings, go to the Hall of Heroes. We need to set up this room in 15 minutes for the luncheon, but we need the tables clear of all the paper. Please don't leave your handbags, and then we can tell you to come back in 15 minutes, hopefully.